Good afternoon. I think we're ready to start. I'll call the meeting to order. This is the meeting of the Health, Environment, and Community Engagement Committee. I'm Chair of the committee, Cam Gordon. I'm joined today by Andrew Johnson, Jacob Fry, and Elizabeth Glidden. We're a quorum of the committee, so we can conduct the committee's business. We have 4 items before us today, 2 discussion items and 2 consent items. First, I'll move forward with the consent items. Any committee member can pull something off if they want to discuss it. First item is accepting a grant from the Kresge Foundation in the amount of $125,000 to complete the Emerging Leaders in Public Health Initiative. And the second item is passage of the resolution establishing the Southside Green Zone Task Force and approving the list of Southside Task Force members that will begin this September and end August 2018. I don't think I'll read through the list, but it's available to everybody who wants to see it on the committee agenda. And congratulations on establishing the Green Zones Task Force, whoever here who was involved with that. Anybody want to discuss either item? And then I will move forward the consent. Councilmember Fry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On item number 2, the Green Zone Task Force, there may have been previous appointments that are made. I'm assuming this is not a maybe it's not a wholly complete list, but there's, unless I'm reading this wrong, there's not anybody from North Minneapolis.
So this is the Southside Green Zone Task Force.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
it's
you're
never
right.
been created.
That's my fault.
And they have, okay.
That's my fault. I misread. Thank you.
There will be, probably in the future, there will also be our Northside Green Zone Task Force that will have to be formed with a similar resolution, but that's a few months behind this one.
My mistake. Thank you.
You bet. So then, seeing no further questions on that, I will move both items. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Any abstentions? Those motions carry then. And now we'll move on to our discussion items. The first is the Minneapolis Tree Advisory Commission Annual Report. And I believe we will have the co-chair of the Tree Advisory Committee, Peggy Booth, to make the presentation. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here today to present to you our annual report. It's a little bit later than we usually do it, but it's still very timely. So this is our annual report that we are presenting to you. And just as a reminder, the Minneapolis Tree Advisory Commission was created in 2004 in order to enhance the Minneapolis urban forest and improve its long-term health. We have a series of goals, and the last one listed here is actually a new goal. We're working with the Park Board to look at our charter, if you will, to see how we're organized and what our goals are. And one of the things that we have increasing interest in is to assist in volunteer opportunities and in educating Minneapolis communities and residents to be engaged in tree planting and care. So this is a list of our members. I'm co-chair along with Lori Strom, and Don Willicke is our secretary. And we have citizen members, a developer, representative of the mayor, the park board, a city council designee, Robin Garwood, who serves you well as representatives from Public Works and the school board. The report topics I will talk about today are accomplishments, and then 4 different categories in which we have some commentary and some recommendations. Managing emerald ash borer, planting more trees, keeping trees healthy, and minimizing loss from construction. And as I indicated, we'll have recommendations on those 4 topics. So first, regarding the accomplishments, this has been really a banner year for the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. At the time we put this together, we thought there was 9,500 trees planted, and if you count all trees planted on parks and other things, it's well over 10,000 this year. And of particular importance is the great diversity in different genus and species of these trees. And this includes planting with children as well as on our boulevards and parks and so forth. And regardless of which number we use, this is the most trees planted in a single season since the early 1980s. Minneapolis Arbor Day was down on Hiawatha Park this year, And it was also a very outstanding Arbor Day event. Over 250 trees are planted, 68 different types of trees, over 1,500 people involved. I've never seen so many people at an Arbor Day event. And there were all kinds of activities, from fun runs and tree planting to children participating with arborists to see what it's like to be an arborist, and various tree-themed games and events. So it was really an outstanding event, and a lot of thanks is due to Philip Potyandi and other staff with the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. The tree preservation coordinator position was funded in 2007, and through this position being funded, trees are being saved through plan review and field oversight and cooperation between the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board and the city. So we thank the city and the park board very much for putting that position in place. Another accomplishment that you should be proud of is the Minneapolis Urban Forest Policy, which was fully updated in 2016. And again, the Park Board and Public Works collaborated very well together on this project. There are references to forestry specifications in the city's standard specifications to ensure their use by contractors, consultants, and city staff. And we really think that that makes a difference, and appreciate the work that city staff spent accomplishing this. Another accomplishment has to do with Dutch elm disease control. Only 1,200 elms needed to be removed in 2016. And this demonstrates each year we're having to remove fewer and fewer elms from Dutch elm disease. And this really demonstrates the success of prompt removals and preserving those trees that are left. There's an estimate that Minneapolis still has about 25,000 elms. And I would say these are the bigger elms, not little seedlings in someone's garden. So it really is paying off in preserving the values of our tree canopy. Also, the city and the park board are benefiting from the implementation of the ash canopy replacement plan. We are now in the fourth of an 8-year program, which was provided some extra funding by the citizens of Minneapolis. And it's successfully diversifying our urban forest by replacing ash trees with a greater diversity of trees. And we really think that's looking ahead for the city. So that leads directly into managing emerald ash borer as the first topic we'll talk about with some recommendations. Our losses are accelerating. Emerald ash borer is now affecting most parts of Minneapolis. And I'll just walk you through so you can see year by year since 2010, how this insect problem has spread throughout the city. So here we are in 2017 with a large number of neighborhoods that haven't been affected by it before, now having definite trees that have been diagnosed with emerald ash borer. So we are again slowing the spread by detecting and removing infested trees. And if you look at this chart that was developed for cities further east from us, you can see that after so many years, the declines start accelerating significantly. And we are at the bottom of that curve. But there's some studies that are being done by the Department of Agriculture and others that lead us to hope that our mortality from emerald ash borer will be lower because we are actually reducing the population of ash trees. So this informed management plan, the park board collaborates with experts to refine its approach and does ash replacement based on infestation levels. Whoops. So in this map, the darker areas have more replacement of the existing ash happening, and then the couple neighborhoods that are still green without documented cases of emerald ash borer are not yet as involved in that ash replacement project or strategy. So in terms of managing emerald ash borer, of the 1 million trees in Minneapolis, before EAB came, about 200,000 of them were ash, and about 40,000 of these were public trees on boulevards and in parks. And by the end of 2017, 20,000 of these public ash will be removed in order to replant. And those are being replanted with a diversity of trees. So I think one of the wake-up calls for us now is that most ash trees are in private yards, and the responsibility for removing those does fall to residents. And all green ash and white ash and black ash are susceptible to emerald ash borer. And if the tree becomes infested, its removal is mandatory. And a big tree like this can be an expense as well as a real loss to people who have them in their yards. So there's private trees are starting to be marked and removed. The one on the left side here is just down the alley from me, and it was removed earlier this year. But it concerns me because right across from the alley is an even bigger, more beautiful ash shown in the middle of this picture here. And I am concerned that residents all over the city where emerald ash borer is need to be aware, is my tree an ash or not? And what is going to be my strategy to address that? So our first recommendation to the city is that the city work in cooperation with the park board to create a communications plan to increase property owner awareness and action. And property owners should know if their tree is an ash, should know that emerald ash borer is likely to kill it soon, and if it dies, they will be responsible to have it removed, and they should make a plan whether they want to proactively remove it and replace it, whether they want to treat it, or whether they want to just have that immediate responsibility when it has the insects infesting it.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
A large tree like that must cost quite a bit of money to have it removed?
Yes, it would.
Is the tree advisory looked at estimates of what the costs are for tree removal?
I don't have that information. Here in the room with us today is Ralph Siebert, the city's forester. I don't know if he has any information on private removals.
I'm also curious about if it's not removed, does the park board or the city go in and remove it for you because you're mandated to remove it, or what's
Yeah,
that?
Ralph, could you answer Mr. Gordon's question?
Thank you, welcome.
Hi. Just like diseased elm trees, when an ash or any tree reaches the point of being just dead and hazardous, those trees fall under the city housing inspections program. An infested ash tree, though, on private property is just like an infested or a diseased elm tree, where we can also condemn that and have it removed. And in each case, they can be on property taxes to be assessed.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Our second category of recommendations regards plant more trees. And we believe it's very important to continue the benefits the trees offer to all of us, to continue increasing the diversity of trees planted. The park board is doing very well, as I indicated before, with hundreds of different species and cultivars and over 45 genus and 20 families of trees. Our recommendation to the city and the park board is to continue to increase the tree canopy, and we believe that this can be done by encouraging more planting on private land, not just residential land, but offices, industrial land, and other spaces that might have large green areas. And in addition, we encourage the city to collaborate to plant more along transportation corridors, both those that are under the jurisdiction of the city, the county, and the State Department of Transportation. Our aspiration is to try to achieve 40% tree canopy cover by year 2040. And as I have talked about in previous year reports, there's a lot of scientific evidence that the benefits of trees, the way they help reduce air pollution, keep us cooler in the summer, shelter us from the winter winds, and reduce stormwater runoff, is all directly related to the amount of leaves that there are in that urban forest, which can be measured or is indicated by the tree canopy cover. So the higher our tree canopy cover, the more benefits related to stormwater, air quality, energy use, and so forth. So our specific recommendation to the city is to increase funding for the city tree program. That it is a very successful city-supported program providing economical trees to city residents. This map shows the distribution in 2017 with the north-central parts of the city getting a head start in being able to get those trees and the other trees being obtained through lottery. And we really encourage the city to have a more, to merge the commercial tree planting program that's under the city jurisdiction with the city tree residential program and call them city tree residential and city tree commercial. Because it's only by planting on both residential and commercial properties that we'll be able to adequately increase our tree canopy cover. And we also encourage the city, for the very same reasons, to emphasize large canopy trees. The bigger a tree will ultimately get, if it's in the right place and can be sustained there, the more benefits it will provide. Another specific recommendation is that the park board or city work to update the tree canopy inventory that was done a few years ago in order to identify tree planting priorities for tree vacancies. This can involve updating satellite tree canopy assessment and processing the data and identifying planting sites and integrating that into the asset management system of park board forestry. And I would also say this is a tool that neighborhood groups should be encouraged to use so that they can encourage tree planting in their own local areas where it is most needed. Another recommendation that we have, this one to the park board, is to fund a community outreach coordinator. And there are a lot of events that just sort of either don't get done or get done by adding it to someone's already busy schedule. So that would include organizing Arbor Day events, overseeing and expanding the Citizen Pruner program, which I'll talk about in a moment, increasing neighbor and community care of young trees, working on the fruit and nut tree project. Some capital funding was provided through the city council to the park board to plant more fruit and nut trees, and that needs someone to really focus on getting that implemented. And then to advise the city and community groups regarding increasing EAB awareness and action and implementing city trees and targeting outreach to the least forested neighborhoods, businesses, and so forth. Our next category of recommendations relates to keep trees healthy. So the first step is planting the right trees in the right place, and I think we're doing better and better at that. The city has, the park board has been cooperating with a volunteer through the Minneapolis Tree Commission and the university to do a 5-year study of 200 park board trees planted each year to find out what leads to greater success or less success in the survival of those trees. And so they have preliminary findings from the first 3 years. And the annual survival rate of newly planted trees is 83 to 100%, with most trees, most categories of trees being over 90% survival. But the lowest survival is when the weather is harsh, and if it's a balled and burlap planting, or it's a fall planting with a dry winter, or when it's being planted in commercial and multifamily areas. So this is preliminary findings based on just 3 years of data. So we're looking forward to the full 5-year study and seeing what we can learn from that to help improve the success rate of our public tree plantings. Another recommendation we made to the park board, but this would apply to any city properties as well, is to make sure that grounds maintenance staff are trained to keep mowers and weed whips away from trees, because banging into the trees, whether it's obvious initially or not, will kill the most critical part of the tree and eventually lead to the decline and death of a tree. And the park board does have a video. This is a little clip from it, perhaps a little graphic, but that is also available to other agencies as a training program. A recommendation we have to the city is to continue to work to minimize impacts on tree roots through alternative sidewalk repair. And the Public Works is definitely implementing more innovative ways of ramping walkways over the roots of trees or grinding the edges, but there's still a lot of places where this kind of innovative approach, which will help prolong the life of the sidewalk, will reduce accidental trips by people when sidewalks get heaved, and will certainly help prolong the life health of trees. We made a recommendation to the park board that they expand the Citizen Pruner program. These are trained volunteers that trim suckers and small broken branches and so forth, and it safely supplements the forestry's pruning budget and schedule. So you can see on the two right-hand slides, some suckers on this tree were obscuring a stop sign, and after the citizen pruner work was done, the stop sign was no longer obscured. And I would just say I volunteered as a citizen pruner last Saturday in the Howe neighborhood, and we spent 3 hours, about a dozen of us doing it. And it's a very worthwhile program. And if anybody's interested in volunteering in this way, the park board is going to be training another class of citizen pruners this fall. So you could contact the Park and Recreation Board to be involved in this fun way of getting good exercise and helping our urban forest. Another recommendation to both the park board and the city is that we need to have multiple permanent tree processing sites across the city whenever trees come down through storms, which will happen sooner or later, emerald ash borer or other emergencies. Large spaces are needed to process those trees. And if multiple permanent sites can be located throughout the city, it will save on hauling costs and save on staff time and just be a benefit. And these are the kinds of sites that could be used by Public Works for other kinds of public infrastructure types of projects where you need a lot of space and not necessarily all the time. Another recommendation to the city is to bury electric wires during road construction projects and to work on the best ways to fund this. We know that the city council members and staff have been looking at different ways of doing this in conjunction with the utility companies, and we just encourage more work on this. Then the final category of recommendations is to minimize loss from construction. And we really think it's important for the city and the park board to continue the success of the Urban Forestry Preservation Coordinator, who works side by side with staff and contractors and plan reviewers to make sure that projects are not unnecessarily hurting trees. And in addition to that, we think that the planner's checklist for park construction projects should more specifically give value to preserving large trees. And I guess we made this recommendation to the park board, but for city construction projects, it could be an important step as well. So to recap our recommendations, under Manage Emerald Ash Borer, create a communications plan to increase property owner awareness. Under Plant More Trees, encourage planting on private land and corridors, identify tree planting opportunities, and increase funding for the city tree program, both residential and commercial, and fund the forestry outreach coordinator. Under Keep Trees Healthy, the recommendations are protect park trees from mowers and weed whips, but that also applies to all public lands. Minimize the impacts of tree roots through alternative sidewalk repair. Keep doing the job, and you're doing a great job, but keep doing more. Expand the Citizen Pruner program. Acquire multiple permanent tree processing sites, and bury electrical wires during road construction. Under Minimize Loss from Construction, continue the success of the Urban Forestry Preservation Coordinator and include Park Board Forestry in Planner's Checklist for construction projects. So with that, I would be happy to take any questions or comments that you have.
I don't see any questions right now. So just to clarify, so the forestry department isn't in the planner's checklist for construction projects right now?
Our concern is that in projects, protection of large mature trees is sometimes an afterthought. And the direction, when they send out RFPs and other solicitation of planning and design services, those people are not being told upfront that trees are a high enough priority. So yes, some point down the way they might be considered, but if upfront that value of protecting large, healthy trees is part of what every project is just automatically intended to do, we think that that would be better. And we wouldn't run into projects where after the fact forestry gets brought in and then it's too late to effectively preserve the trees and achieve the other objectives of the project.
And is this something you think the park board is willing to take on? Okay, I got a
They
head
seem
nod.
to be when I presented this to them last month.
Okay, great.
And I think we have a lot of encouragement through our city forester.
Maybe just one last thing from me. There has been some controversy about emerald ash borer and if we're supposed to be using some kind of a pesticide or insecticide. And the tree advisory, I believe, has taken a position that they support this removal and replanting.
Yeah.
And I guess you've been silent on what people should do on their private property, but is that still the position? And you still support not using these potentially dangerous pesticides?
In terms of the public trees and looking at long-term cost-benefit analysis, the Tree Commission doesn't think it makes sense to use pesticides, which may have unintended consequences on pollinators and other potentially, cumulative effects that we don't even know about, that we've taken the position that it is better from a fiscal and a cautionary principle environmental point of view not to use it on public lands. That is not to say that there's never a place for that to be used. So individual property owners, if they have high value trees that are strategically located, that are very good condition, that they've had professional pruning done on, that they know are in a good place and provide a lot of benefit. If they choose to do it, they can use a licensed company and do it, but that's their individual choice. So the Tree Commission has not taken a position on private use of it, but we have not supported the use of it on our public boulevard trees.
Yeah, appreciate that. And as usual, I appreciate the clear presentation and the report, and we'll look at these recommendations and see what we can do. I think if we do work on a communications plan, of course, we'll have to work with the park board and the forestry department too, but this will give us a lot of food for thought. And I certainly would love to see us bury more wires during road construction, and I think all the recommendations look good.
Okay,
So
thank you very much.
Very welcome. Seeing no other questions or comments, then I will move to receive and file the report. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so that is done, and that brings us to our final item, and this is an update. I think it's in response to a staff direction about our efforts to, did you have a question about the
Yeah,
tree
sorry,
report?
Mr. Chair. Well, it's not really a question. It's more of a, there's several really good recommendations that were made there. I guess staff doesn't need anything in addition to just the receive and file. Do they need kind of the okay that we approve those recommendations and we can kind of move forward? Or
Well, some of the recommendations are for the park board and some of them are for
Right.
the city. We could do a staff direction if you'd like. We could do more.
not unless it's necessary.
Some of it
If it's not necessary, then it's fine.
might be helpful. Not part of it. We got to take some ownership then of trying to push them forward on our own, though. I didn't prepare any staff directions from it, but all right. So we're going to let. All right. Thank you very much. And so now we have our fourth item on the agenda, which is the report on the 100% renewable electricity options. And Brian Milberg is going to be giving us a brief presentation.
Committee Chair Gordon, other committee members, I'm Brian Milberg, the energy manager for the city, and I was directed to put forward a report on what it would take to get the city towards 100% renewable electricity in our municipal operations. So the first part to go over in the report is all of our electricity right now, of course, comes from Xcel Energy, and every year they produce their own report stating where they get their electricity, how it's generated. And right now, coal and nuclear still provide the majority of the electricity that's used in Minnesota. However, the renewable, which would be the yellow for wind, the blue for hydro, and the purple for biomass, adds up to 25%, which is the highest percentage yet, and that was in 2016. You see solar there is less than 1%, but it's growing rapidly. We project within the next 2 years it could be as much as 2 to 3% of their electricity. In the report, I was asked to go over what has happened with our electricity usage in the last few years. So here we have a chart showing since 2010. and it shows that the electricity has slightly increased in our city operations. The electricity is divided up in the various colors, showing the various departments in the city. The three largest segments of each bar are the water treatment facility, which uses almost 40 million kilowatt hours a year, followed by the streetlights, and then the convention center in the green. The next are our office buildings, followed by our service nodes, such as our maintenance facilities, the fire department, the police department, and then some smaller departments. So overall, we've, as you can see, bounced up and down a little bit. We haven't reduced the amount of electricity over those 8 years. However, we have reduced our greenhouse gas emissions because each year Xcel Energy has been reducing their greenhouse gas emission to generate the electricity. But we really have a tale of two different things going on at the same time. In our actual facilities, the buildings, we have done a fairly good job of reducing our electricity usage. We've reduced it almost 7.5% in 7 years. The convention center in green, again, is the largest user of our buildings, and they've done a very good job. It shows they reduced it 6%, but this is somewhat misleading because they've actually increased their rental space in terms of square foot rented out each year by almost 20% since 2010, and yet at the same time reduced their electricity usage. They've done many programs there with LED lights and various HVAC upgrades and controls, and actually they've only done half of their lights. Now this year they're starting all of the lights in the public areas, all of the concourses, and all of the meeting rooms, which actually, many of which still have incandescent lights because they had to be dimmable. Now that LED has dropped down in price and increased in efficiency, I expect the convention center to continue to reduce its usage quite a bit over the years. The same is true in our fire stations and our police department. Many of the buildings have reduced their electricity over time as well. However, if you look at the services that the city provides, and I categorize this as the water treatment, and then again our street lights and street signals, you can see that it's actually increased somewhat over the years. Now, some of this is due to the water treatment plant changing its operations to somewhat more energy-intensive ultrafiltration plant that came online a few years ago. Some of it has to do with the repairs that have been made in 2010. So it's somewhat artificially low for 2010, which makes it look like we increased quite a bit since then with the water treatment. The street lights and signals pretty much stays constant. We have a given number of street lights that are owned by Xcel, about 18,000. And then we have about 12,000 street lights that the city owns and maintains. And as we renovate streets, we switch the wood pole lights that Xcel owns over to city-owned lights, but the total number of lights stays about the same in the city. And the same with street signals. We don't add signals to too many new intersections each year. So these are fairly constant.
Can I just ask about
Yes.
the converting to LED lights for our street lights? Wouldn't we be able to reduce our electricity usage there? And what's the status of that?
Yes, Chairman Gordman, yes, we can reduce it significantly, and I'll show that in a slide here.
Oh, okay.
So what I was asked to do was to say within 5 years, by 2022, we're currently using about 101 to 102 million kilowatt hours a year for all of our operations. Where could we be? And with existing technology, such as what you just mentioned, LED lighting, we have significant improvements we can make. The water treatment plant is being held constant in its analysis. However, we can decrease the amount used for the street lights by 50% over the next 5 years. Xcel Energy is just about to embark on a project where they're going to replace their lights that they own, and the city has already replaced 1,000 of our 12,000 street lights that we own with LED lights, and each one of those can reduce between 50 to 60% of the amount of electricity used. So you see a very big drop by 2022 in the street light, which is the orange. The green, I estimate the convention center, even with increasing business, can continue to save energy. And I've looked at calculations and feel that they can reduce their energy yet by another 10%. However, in office space, even though we are building or embarking on building this new consolidated office, we're going to have somewhat more square footage, as well as the fact that many of our departments are in leased space, which aren't counted in these numbers. And so even though we're going to build a much more efficient building, in my analysis, we're going to be spending about the same amount of money and buying about the same amount of electricity for our office space after that building is built. In the service nodes, even though we are increasing square footage with our East Yards storage facility, as well as what may happen with the Hiawatha expansion, those buildings are going to be much more efficient. And I still project further decreases of 5% in those facilities, as well as all of the police precincts and the fire stations. Each year, we're renovating 1 or 2 fire stations with all new HVAC equipment, as well as LED lighting, and the same with police stations. We're now embarking on replacing all of their lighting as well. So totaling all that up, even if there are no changes in technology with the existing lighting of today and HVAC equipment, I feel we can get into the range of a 15% further reduction in electricity usage. So the issue before us is, how do we get to 100% renewable? So part of it is we're going to reduce the amount of electricity. The second part is we just recently, last month, took a contract in the new Xcel Energy Renewable Connect program for 17.8 million kilowatt hours of electricity. This was the most that was allowed under the way the program was designed. No customer could take more than 10% of the amount of electricity offered. And that 17.8 million kilowatt hours, which we'll start receiving this month, will get us to about 17% renewable energy directly from almost zero right now. Xcel has come back to us, and the program did not become fully subscribed. And they have asked us if we're interested in pursuing more of this Renewable Connect program. To do so, Xcel Energy will have to go back to the Public Utilities Commission and get this cap of 10% lifted on the participation rate. And we've been asked to supply a letter of interest if we are interested. So there are kind of 3 basic things we need to do if we want to get to 100% electricity. The easiest and quickest for the city is to assist Xcel in getting this tariff changed at the Public Utilities Commission, and we have been offered between 50 and 60 million kilowatt hours additional into this Renewable Connect program, which would take us into the 65 to 66% renewable range. The other thing we need to decide, although not today, but in the near future, is should we pursue putting solar arrays on land the city owns? And the most likely spot for that would be at the water treatment facility. We have about 7 acres that are basically unused land because that's where our reservoirs are sited. These are simply rectangular boxes of concrete underground with about 2 feet of dirt on top. So it's a very flat surface. It's basically just like a roof. And we could get between 5 and 7 megawatts of solar arrays. We could generate about 6.5 to 8% of our electricity usage if we were to invest in solar arrays. The cost for that would be somewhere between $10 and $12 million. And the payback would be about 13 years. So that's another option we have. And then we have kind of a somewhat complicated situation. As you know, we agreed to participate in the community solar garden movement here in Minnesota. We currently have 7.5 million kilowatt hours subscribed in these community solar gardens, where we are basically assisting in solar penetration into the electricity grid. However, we cannot claim the renewable energy credits for that electricity. So the 7.5 million kilowatt hours, even though it is actually assigned to us for our use, Xcel Energy actually owns the renewable energy credits. So none of that electricity has been counted in our movement towards 100% renewable electricity. It does increase the amount of renewable electricity Xcel has, and that's one of the reasons that the wind and solar is growing, is through these types of programs. Unfortunately, if we pursue the community solar gardens, it limits our ability to claim 100% renewable energy. So at some point, we need to decide, do we want to continue to look for those subscriptions, or do we want to stop? Because these are 25-year contracts, which we're now locked into for about 7% of our electricity. Meaning that in 2022, if we pursued our own arrays and got more renewable energy from Xcel through this Renewable Connect program, we still would only be able to get to about 93% renewable energy in 5 years because of these outstanding contracts.
And maybe you could just remind the committee that we still have one RFP that's out there. So and maybe that's included in your 7%, but that we've got some responses to, and we'll be making a decision about pursuing that community solar garden or not.
Yes, Chairman Corbin, we do have the RFP that we produced for our low-income housing sponsored solar garden to try and get more low-income household participation in the solar garden movement. We're in the middle of reviewing those. We had 7 responses, every single one of which was financially positive, meaning that there were going to be savings. I can't discuss the results of that because we're still reviewing the proposals, but we, again, will have to make a decision of how many of those we want to pursue.
Mm-hmm. So is this the last slide?
That was the last slide. So the conclusion is we can get to 93% with various avenues open to us today. It's going to be difficult to get to 100% by 2022 because of these solar garden contracts. Our options, however, are we could work with Xcel Energy or the other utilities to purchase renewable energy credits on the open market to offset that 7.5 million kilowatt hours, which is a relatively inexpensive way to claim you're using renewable energy.
Well, maybe that's something to think about. I just have to say that in a way, the 7%, if it's through community solar gardens, to me would feel like and look like to a lot of people, we're still getting it from renewable energy because we're investing there and we're getting it from those. But I understand the way the rules are set up that we can't actually maybe claim that 100%. So we can get there. When I looked at this and I had a meeting with staff, I actually am supportive of both of the options, increasing participation and also looking at building our own arrays on the water treatment reservoir. But of course, that's a big capital outlay. I think that needs some more thought, some more work. I mean, maybe it doesn't necessarily go through the click process, but it may, and that might be more appropriate. And so I think finance is looking into that in more detail. But I do think we have an opportunity to go ahead with this letter of intent. And so there is a staff direction about that, indicating to Xcel Energy, this would direct Property Services staff to send a letter to Xcel Energy indicating the city's interest in obtaining the additional 50 to 65 million kilowatts of annual electricity from Xcel Renewable Connect program. That would also have to go through the Ways and Means process. But I think in discussion with Mr. Milberg and also with the finance director, that seemed like a good next step to take. So I'm going to, I guess maybe I'll move to receive and file and that staff direction at the same time. Is there a discussion on that? Seeing none, then all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, that motion carries. And then as I think we've concluded all our business, so this meeting is adjourned.